Until recently, millions of people thought Ryan Reynolds was one of the funniest and most charming men in Hollywood and the world over. But behind the sarcasm, the quick-wit jokes, and the effortless charisma, there's a darker psychological story he has quietly hinted at for years. A childhood shaped by fear, a father he struggled to emotionally connect with, and an anxiety that never really went away. When you start looking closely, Ryan Reynolds' humor, it might not just be a talent of his, but it actually may be a mechanism for his survival. Welcome back to Justice for All.
In real life, do you have any phobias or any fears that you're trying to conquer?
Yeah. I may look like the Green Lantern, but on the inside, I'm Woody Allen. I've always had a difficulty with airplanes, and I've had some bad experiences with spiders, so I got a bit of arachnophobia as well.
I mean, if you were a superhero, what kind of superpower would you like the most?
I think whatever superpower I had, I would probably not be the best person to use it judiciously. I think I would be doing a lot of misbehaving. I'd use superpowers probably for evil. More evil than I would good.
Ryan Reynolds grew up in Vancouver with 3 older brothers and a very strict father, James Reynolds. His father was a former police officer, a job known for requiring a certain emotional toughness and control, obedience, authority. And according to Ryan Reynolds himself, his father could be very intimidating and wildly unpredictable. In interviews, Reynolds has described childhood moments where he felt like he was constantly walking on eggshells. He said he became extremely good at reading people's emotions, especially his father's. Why? Because in tense households, children learn something very quickly. If you can predict the mood, if you can predict what might be transpiring in a room as far as the emotional tone, the how palpable it is, what are the emotions that what's the emotional interplay between the people in the room, especially the adults. If I can get a read on that and become able to predict what is coming out, what is flowing through, and most importantly, what may perhaps be directed at me, then I can learn how to manipulate the situation. I can learn how to emotionally manipulate people in order to preserve my own emotional safety. Reynolds has openly admitted something fascinating about his personality. He learned to use humor as a defense mechanism. In other words, if you can make people laugh, I mean, we've heard of this before, right? If you can make people laugh, you can control that emotional environment. You could diffuse tension and stay safe, or at least relatively safe, more safe than what he thought he may be otherwise. This is actually very well-known psychological survival strategy, right? We've heard about this time and time again, especially in Hollywood, in the celebrity field. Children in unpredictable homes often develop a hyper-social intelligence, and they end up becoming entertainers and charmers, performers, stage people. You know, the joke becomes the shield. Comedians, performers of all different kinds, because performance ends up being the name of the game. The joke becomes the shield, and eventually the shield just sticks and forms and becomes the identity, or as we like to call it around here, the mask. Despite the confidence of being on screen and having people come to the multiplex to see him in the next whatever movie, Reynolds has spoken publicly about having severe anxiety. He's talked about it quite a bit over his career, actually, and before interviews and talk show appearances or public events. He has said he sometimes even feels physically sick, and a lot of us who have anxiety, we know that feeling very well. He's described having the racing thoughts, the intense worry, the panic before performances, the panic in starting a new film and being on a new set with all new people. Yet somehow, the moment the camera turns on, he is able to transform. And this is something psychologists usually call high-functioning anxiety, right? We have high-functioning, just about everything in the world of psychology. And this, of course, would be a very high-functioning anxiety because he's not only turned his wounds into a mask of protection, he's turned his mask into something viable and highly profitable. It's earned him a lot of money, a lot of success, the fame, all of the things that he's been going for. The mask actually got him to a place of a top echelon, if you will, top of the heap, the hierarchy, the Hollywood hierarchy, where if I can just get to the top of the top and be at the top of the game instead of a middle or a lower ground peasant player, if I can just reach the heights and sit atop wearing the crown, then I'll be safe. Then no one can attack me. No one can challenge me. No one can come after me and try to take me down. But as Hollywood likes to teach over and over and over again, whenever you get to the top, the crowd will always be around to take you back down. Externally, he can be calm, funny, charismatic. Internally, that nervous system is just constantly scanning for danger. It's in overdrive. It's going into this space of fight or flight all the time, and then calming down and then revving back up again. And, when you think about his childhood, that actually makes a lot of sense. And I'm not just trying to make, psychological cliches here about, oh, it's in my childhood. We all know that, but one of the reasons that these cliches have become cliches is because a lot of times it's just the truth, unfortunately.
Come and give us your unpopular opinion. Something up till now that you've been scared to say. What the listeners won't be seeing, obviously, because it's radio, is your hand. Your hand is doing an amazing thing, Ryan.
This is, I can't control this hand. So, it just does that whenever. But I have no idea what's happening.
Something up till now that you've been scared to say.
Yeah, this hand is panicking, is what's actually happening. So this doesn't. I just get to look at you nice and cool, but this hand is like, oh, stop.
That's how you really feel.
Remember these lines.
Is that how you're really feeling? Yeah. Can we do an a cappella quickly? Come and give us your unpopular opinion. Something up till now. I'm very high this morning. Let's have another.
I like that song.
Somewhat ironically, or perhaps not, the role that actually made him a global superstar might perfectly reflect this psychological pattern. I think that it does. I think Deadpool is his magnum opus, not just as far as the film and the action sequences and the comedy and box office dollars and, it being $1 billion franchise. All of that is the after effect. The cause is that it is the perfect blend of everything Ryan Reynolds has been building within the mask of his own identity his entire career, and really his entire life, if we go all the way back and we look at the kid who was just too scared to withstand the emotional environment in which he was born into. And a lot of us can relate to that, right? And so he finally, after years of running around and playing these different characters, he gets Deadpool. And Deadpool is basically just his walking defense mechanism, right? It's nothing but constant jokes. It's relentless sarcasm. It's all of his humor rolled into one character that is used to mask the pain, even within the actual story of the film, which Reynolds had control over. The dialogue and the story. Where are we going to hear that again? Ahem. It was humor used to mask pain. And not just pain, but the fear of more pain, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being attacked. And in many ways, this Deadpool character, it feels less like a character that Reynolds just played. It feels like one that he created. And even more so, like an amplified version of the personality he had already built that became the mask that he was always wearing. One of the reasons that we do go back into the past, and oftentimes that past includes childhood, early childhood, even up into early adolescence or even late stage adolescence, to see how these psychological wounds unfurl throughout an individual's life journey. And so we can look back and see that, James Reynolds, he was I think he was part of the Mounties in Canada, and he was very emotionally reserved, stoic, and that's putting it lightly, can be explosive and was oftentimes physically absent. When we put all the pieces together, and of course this is never is a diagnosis, I'm just looking at different aspects of this and pulling something together and giving a description. It's not a diagnosis. It's just helping to understand what may have happened here with this man who fooled the majority of the world. When we look at these wounds and the personality as far as his father, who he was, who he wasn't, what he did, what he didn't do, we can see that there is evidence of what in psychology we often call the father wound. The father wound is a psychological and developmental injury. It's rooted in the father's physical absence or emotional unavailability, this emotional reserved nature of a man, perhaps. And sometimes it can be when that reserved nature comes out in an explosive way, that results in this chronic criticism during a boy's upbringing, when that boy is trying to grow up and become a young man and then become a grown man. And that father figure is meant to be the shape and appearance. It is the epitome of what it means to be a man in this world, and thus what the opinions and the treatment, how love is shown, how it is not shown, how it is restricted. It is a psychological necessity for a young man, for a small boy, to have that nourishment, that care, that emotional openness, and that guidance as he grows up in order to evolve into an emotionally healthy and resound man that is capable of having, sensible, safe, strong, and secure attachment styles in relationship, but also in the relationship with himself and how he conducts himself out in the world, and then the stability of the relationships that he has with his friends, people he knows, people he loves and cares about, people he works with, colleagues, people that are in with perhaps a social hierarchy, where he sees that hierarchy as something that he willingly wants to bring good parts of himself to try to make the world a better place somehow, not a tower he has to climb in order to build the walls around him at the top of this hierarchical castle, so that maybe for once in his life, he'll actually feel emotionally safe. One of the effects of the father wound, especially in the adult male, the father wound, is just an insatiable workaholism, where this individual, this man, he receives the substitution of love in the validation and perhaps even praise that comes from, doing well in the job, scoring the big project, turning a great project in, receiving promotions, receiving, in his case, in Ryan Reynolds' case, #1 movies, working with the biggest names in the industry, #1 at the box office when the opening weekend hits. And then it doesn't, for him, it's not limited to that, because he's now spread out into all of these other areas. He's running this marketing firm, I think now, that had all the scandal in It Ends With Us and what happened with that, and the Betty Boos and all of Blake's sourly misdirected attempts at selling and building her own brand. And yeah, he went in, he's an owner of a soccer team in a different country. He's Mint Mobile he started, and I think he sold it for an insane amount of money. And so he could not sit in that one career and work at the top of that game. He had to keep going. And one thing we see when people are branching out into these different fields of work, yes, this kind of ambition and this kind of success should be applauded and perhaps rewarded if it is indeed coming from a healthy place psychologically and emotionally. But here, we're not seeing the signs of that, at least not anymore. Instead, we're seeing the signs of a very dysfunctional man who may well be falling apart at his very seams. And I can only imagine what this Ends With Us, Baldoni, Lively, I can only imagine what this has done to him psychologically, what the absolute nightmare this has rained down on his central nervous system. I can only imagine his own unleashing of terror behind closed doors, while yes, of course, out in the public eye, especially on camera and interviews or what have you, he remains Ryan Reynolds, Mr. Charming, so forth and so on. He puts on the mask, he knows how to wear it very well. But what happens when the mask comes off? Because at the end of the day, he does have to go home and be a husband and a father to his own children. Or maybe he doesn't. Maybe when, let's say, feeling under attack, even when that attack may have some blame under his own roof, does he retreat into what he was shown by his own father, a workaholism that actually just works more closely as escapism, and then he becomes the emotionally absent father. He now in turn becomes the one who is physically distant, off in a distant land making movies, watching his soccer team building businesses. I don't know that. I want to make that clear. This is all speculation. I don't know. He may be an excellent father and an excellent husband, and I hope that he is, but there are certainly some things that we have seen here in the unfolding of this story that would tend to paint a different picture. In part 2, we're going to take a closer look at that picture, even scaling it back, taking a look at the roots just a little bit so that we can follow this path and how it unfolds in an individual's life. And when it unfolds and goes unexamined or untreated, how it can wreak absolute havoc on said life. So, thank you for watching. I am Aaron Justice. I'll see you in part 2.